It was the dawn of a new decade. The Great War had ended, and Britain was left with a silence that echoed louder than the guns that had stopped firing. Millions of families were grieving. Fields that once grew wheat now held rows of white crosses. Every town, from London to Liverpool, carried scars that could not be seen, the loss of fathers, sons, and brothers. Yet, even in the shadow of tragedy, people began to move again. The trains started running. Markets reopened. Children went back to school. Britain, wounded but unbroken, was learning how to breathe again. The 1920s was a strange decade, full of contrasts. For some, it was an age of progress and freedom. For others, it was a daily struggle to survive. In big cities like London, Manchester, and Birmingham, the sound of trams, street vendors, and jazz mixed together in the air. There was excitement, the feeling that something new was beginning. But there was also exhaustion because recovery came slowly. Factories reopened, but jobs were scarce. The economy was fragile, built on loans and hope. Miners in Wales, steel workers in Sheffield, and dockers in Liverpool faced low wages and long hours. Strikes became common. People were tired of fighting wars. Now they were fighting for bread. Yet the resilience of the British spirit kept the nation alive. Neighbors shared what little they had. Communities stood together. At the same time, technology was changing life in ways people had never imagined. Electricity was spreading through towns and homes. Street lamps glowed where gas lights once flickered. The crackle of radios filled living rooms at night. Families would gather around, listening to the BBC's first broadcasts, the voices of people they would never meet. It was magical, like hearing the heart of Britain itself. But even with these new wonders, life was far from easy. The divide between rich and poor was wide. In London's West End, wealthy families dined in luxury hotels, while in the East End, children played barefoot in muddy streets. A loaf of bread cost only a few pennies, but when wages were uncertain, every penny mattered. The war had changed everything, not just the economy, but how people thought about life itself. There was also something else happening, a quiet revolution in the way people lived and saw the world. After years of death and despair, there was a hunger for life. The Spanish flu pandemic had taken millions more after the war, and those who survived had a new understanding of how fragile life really was. The younger generation didn't want to live in fear anymore. They wanted music, laughter, and freedom. Dance halls opened in every city. Jazz bands from America brought a new rhythm that made people forget their worries. Men and women danced together, something that had once been frowned upon. The Charleston became a national craze. It wasn't just a dance, it was rebellion in motion. Cinema, too, became the escape of the common man. For a few pence, anyone could sit in a dark room and travel somewhere else, to Paris, New York, or a dream that felt far away from the smoke and gray of industrial Britain. Charlie Chaplin, though born in London, was now a global icon, and his silent films made people laugh and cry at the same time. For a nation healing from grief, laughter was medicine. Meanwhile, women were beginning to step out of the shadows. They had worked in factories during the war, and now many refused to go back to the old ways. The right to vote, won after years of struggle, was only the beginning. In the 1920s, women cut their hair short, wore lighter clothes, and embraced independence. The flapper style, once shocking to traditional minds, became a symbol of freedom. It wasn't just about fashion, It was about identity. For the first time, women could imagine lives built on choice, not obedience. Education was improving too. More children stayed in school longer, and literacy rates rose across the country. The government introduced new housing acts to replace war-damaged homes with better living spaces, though progress was slow. The suburbs began to expand, rows of small brick houses with gardens, a dream for many working families who had spent their lives in crowded tenements. Yet, not everyone shared in the progress. In rural areas, farmers struggled as prices fell and machinery replaced labor. In industrial towns, layoffs became common. By the middle of the decade, unemployment had reached over 1 million. The post-war boom that people hoped for never fully arrived. The war had left not just physical damage, but an economic burden that would take generations to pay off. But despite hardship, there was a spirit of endurance. Britain in the 1920s was more than its poverty. It was a nation rediscovering itself. From the cobblestone streets of Edinburgh to the shipyards of Belfast, people kept pushing forward. The idea of keep calm and carry on hadn't yet been coined, but the attitude already lived in the hearts of the people. By the end of the decade, a new generation was coming of age, one that had grown up without ever hearing the sound of gunfire. They were dreamers, artists, and thinkers. They filled cafes and universities with ideas about a better world. And while the storm of the Great Depression was waiting just beyond the horizon for that brief moment in history, Britain dared to believe in joy again. The 1920s weren't just about recovery. They were about transformation. A nation once broken by war was beginning to rebuild, not just its cities, but its soul. Life was still tough, but hope was alive. And in every corner of the country, from a small cottage in Cornwall to the crowded streets of London, people whispered the same quiet promise to themselves. We've made it this far. We'll make it further still. By the middle of the 1920s, Britain was standing on two very different feet. One in the city, where progress, music, and machines promised a better tomorrow. The other in the countryside, where silence, poverty, and fading traditions still ruled daily life. London was booming. New shops opened on Oxford Street. Buses filled the roads, and young people walked with a sense of energy that hadn't been seen in years. The skyline was changing. Buildings grew taller. Signs glowed brighter, and the hum of engines filled the air. London, Manchester, Glasgow, these cities were the heartbeat of modern Britain. Factories buzzed with noise, and the smell of steel, smoke, and sweat became the scent of progress. But beneath the surface, there was another story. Not everyone shared in this new prosperity. While the upper and middle classes were buying new cars and enjoying evenings at the cinema, the working class was still living in cramped terraces with no proper sanitation. In the North, especially in industrial towns, unemployment was rising fast. Mines were closing, wages were being cut, and when workers protested, they were met with police, not promises. In 1926, the situation reached a boiling point, the general strike. For 9 long days, the country stood still. Over 1.5 million workers from across industries, miners, transport workers, dockers, all stopped working in solidarity. Newspapers stopped printing, trains stopped running, and Britain fell into an eerie silence. The strike was more than just a demand for fair pay. It was a cry for respect. The government crushed the strike, and though work eventually resumed, something had changed forever. The trust between the working people and those in power had broken. In pubs, homes, and union halls, the talk was bitter. They have no idea how we live. Meanwhile, rural Britain was fading into the background. Young people were leaving villages for cities, chasing dreams of modern life. Farming communities that had survived for centuries were shrinking. The countryside grew quieter. More sheep than people in some parts of Scotland and Wales. But even as the population shifted, the British countryside kept its charm. It was still the land of green fields, quiet mornings, and church bells, a reminder of the country's soul amidst all the smoke of the industrial world. Urban Britain, however, became the stage of change. Jazz clubs in Soho, modern art exhibitions, electric trams. It was a different world. The 1920s city wasn't just a place to live. It was an idea of progress. But progress, as always, came with a price. The rich danced while the poor endured. The new decade had given Britain its cities of light, but also its shadows. If the cities were the bones of Britain in the 1920s, technology was its heartbeat. Electricity was spreading fast. Homes that had once relied on coal fires now had lights that turned on with a switch. It felt like magic. Radios became a household treasure, one small device that could bring the entire nation together. People tuned in to the BBC to hear King George V's voice, music concerts, or the day's headlines. It was the first time in history that millions could experience the same moment together. Cars, once a rare luxury, began to appear more often on British roads. The Ford Model T, though American, became a common sight, symbolizing modern freedom. People could travel further than ever before. For families who had never seen beyond their town, the car opened a new world. Seaside holidays, countryside picnics, and Sunday drives. Technology didn't just make life easier, it changed how people saw time and opportunity. Typewriters, telephones, and electric machines started appearing in offices. Jobs once reserved for men were now being done by women. After the war, women had proven their strength, and they weren't going back. By the mid-1920s, more women were working in factories, schools, and shops. The image of the quiet housewife began to fade, replaced by women who earned their own wages and walked home with pride. Fashion followed this spirit of independence. Long skirts were replaced by shorter, more practical designs. Hair was cut short into sleek bobs, and makeup became a sign of confidence rather than rebellion. The press called them flappers, but to these women it wasn't a label, it was liberation. They danced, they voted, they worked, and for the first time, they truly felt seen. Education also improved. More schools opened, and literacy became widespread. The young were growing smarter, more aware, and more ambitious. The world was opening up, through books, through cinema, and through the radio. Britain was becoming not just a country of workers, but of thinkers. Entertainment and sports exploded in popularity. Football became a national obsession. Crowds of thousands filled stadiums, waving flags, cheering for their hometown heroes. Boxing and cricket drew huge audiences. The spirit of competition, of pride, and of unity gave people a reason to smile again. Even in art and design, Britain began to shift. Art Deco arrived, sharp lines, bold colors, and the promise of the future. Buildings, posters, even furniture started to look different. The old world of dark wood and lace curtains was being replaced by glass, metal, and light. But the biggest change wasn't material. It was emotional. For the first time, people felt they were part of something bigger. The pace of life was faster, but it was exciting. A new identity was forming, modern, hopeful, and connected. The country that had once seemed broken by war was now leading a quiet revolution, powered by invention and human will. Still, not everyone could keep up. The older generation often looked at the young and whispered, "The world's gone mad." Maybe it had, or maybe it had just begun to live again. By the end of the decade, Britain stood at a crossroads. Its factories were strong, its cities alive, and its people dreaming of the future. But somewhere deep inside, there was also fear, a sense that the good times might not last forever. For now, though, nobody wanted to think about that. The radios were playing, the lights were shining, and, for the first time in a long while, Britain felt alive. While America fought over prohibition, trying to ban alcohol altogether, Britain chose a different path. Here, the pub wasn't a crime scene, it was a community. For centuries, the local pub had been the soul of British life, a place where laughter and music met the sound of clinking glasses. And in the 1920s, that tradition didn't fade. It only grew stronger. Every evening, as the factory whistle stopped and the city lights flickered on, men and women gathered in their favorite pubs. They talked about football scores, politics, or the cost of coal. But mostly, they just came to forget the heaviness of life. After years of war and loss, people wanted moments that felt light. Beer was cheap, and company was free. A pint could buy an hour of laughter, a break from worry. In smoky bars across London, Leeds, and Glasgow, the same songs were sung, some cheerful, some sad, but all from the heart. For the working class, the pub was a second home. It was where birthdays were celebrated, arguments were settled, and news was shared. In villages, the pub was often the only place with light after dark, a warm room glowing in the middle of foggy streets. Britain in the 1920s wasn't just rebuilding its cities, it was reinventing its soul. The country that once defined itself by war and empire was now defining itself by rhythm, art, and imagination. From the laughter in pubs to the jazz echoing down London streets, everything seemed to hum with possibility. And yet, under all that brightness, there was a quiet tension, as if the nation sensed that this joy might not last forever. Prices were rising again, jobs were unstable, and across the ocean, whispers of financial trouble were beginning to spread. But the British people didn't want to think about that yet, for now they danced, they sang, they lived. The 1920s in Britain was not just a decade. It was a heartbeat, a rhythm of survival, joy, and defiance that echoed through every street and every soul. 100 years ago, Britain danced beneath the weight of its own shadows, a nation that had survived war, loss, and hunger, yet somehow still found the courage to sing. The 1920s were not perfect, far from it, but they were alive. Factories smoked again, jazz echoed through foggy streets, and cinema screens flickered with dreams that felt larger than life. The people who had seen the worst of humanity began searching for its beauty once more, in music, in laughter, and in each other. When you walk through London today, past an old pub glowing on a rainy street corner, or a theater sign still shining in the West End, you can almost feel their spirit, the same hope, the same heartbeat. It's as if the 1920s never really left us. They simply change shape, hiding inside our cities, our songs, and our stories. That decade taught Britain one powerful truth, that no matter how heavy the times, people will always find a reason to live, and to live loudly. The flapper dresses have faded, the jazz records have cracked, and the posters have turned yellow with age. But the feeling, that fierce, unstoppable will to keep going, that remains. It lives in every smile shared over a pint, every song sung in a crowded room, every light that still burns in the British night. So, as we look back a century later, we don't just remember the fashion or the music. We remember the resilience, the laughter that rose after silence, the art that bloomed after destruction, the hope that refused to die. Because in the end, the story of the 1920s isn't just about Britain rebuilding its cities. It's about Britain rebuilding its soul.